Oh, hello. Oh, okay. So yeah, realign it. Got it. Oh, sure. Hello. Is your volume working? Hi, everybody. My name is Michael. I have a book out with Drawn and Quarterly, Birds of Maine. It is out this month in stores everywhere, or in a lot of stores. Please order with your local bookstore if you would like to read a copy. It was a webcomic that I started serializing in at some point in 2020 as a daily comic. I had done a daily comic before, and it was sort of a big commitment and one I wasn't ready to throw myself into again. But then, like a lot of people in 2020, especially in the first few months of lockdown, found myself with a bit more free time on my hands than I had previously. So I decided to jump back in again. And it was an idea that I'd been mulling around for a while. It's the premise is it's a group of birds that live on the moon. They have a very like utopian socialist bird society on the moon that is mostly animated by fungal technology, like utopian fungal technology. That their like all their computers and internet and library systems run on, um, and lots of like uh, somewhat abstract interpretations of what like bird technology could look like within the book. Um, and yeah, it centers on one family within it, but like it kind of has a pretty broad scope. I guess should also say, please shoot me questions as I talk because I'm just going to talk somewhat aimlessly until questions start appearing on the right corner of my screen. Um, and yeah, the idea was like I wanted to write. I write a lot of dystopias, but have also been more interested lately in explicitly writing about utopias. I've been very influenced by the way Ursula K. Le Guin has described the dispossessed, especially, but a lot of her other work, ambiguous utopias, and trying to actually hash out what alternative worlds could look like, or ways of living. So that was, I think, a pretty big part of this comic, especially writing in 2020, which can obviously felt like a pretty apocalyptic time. I think if someone were to read this book, I'm kind of unclear how well it'll age because there's a lot of writing in here that is like clearly really reacting to the moment. So I did that a lot, especially like daily. I wasn't really like planning ahead at all. Yeah, and the comic was originally serialized on Instagram and Twitter, Birds of Maine comic. So if you want to sample it, or if you just want to read the whole thing for free and not buy the book, it is still available to read that way. But it won't be. There are like typos I corrected, so and like little art errors. So if you want to read it without typos, and I think it's like more legible in book format. But thank you for the question, Atomic Trigger. And yeah, I wanted to. The other big thing was like I was writing about technology and trying to like come up with all of this alternate technology. And there's like a D&Q post that's going to go out that'll like get into it a bit more on the Instagram as part of my Instagram takeover. But part of it was inspired by another Ursula Le Guin story where she writes about like linguists in the future having to decipher poetry that ants have inscribed onto degerminated seeds, which I thought was very interesting. And then also this old issue of Commandy by Jack Kirby, which is like a future where highly evolved animals mostly run the world. And he had this like one issue where they have dolphin technology where all the dolphins have built these like underground structures and computers that don't really have a top or bottom and can only operate with like punching it with their noses, which was like a big part of Birds of Maine, where I needed to like come up with technology that like would work as mushrooms, but also had like little like the idea was like it could only be operated with their beaks or talons, and ways of communicating that like didn't just involve bird song but involved like the motion of them flapping. I got really interested in the ways people have theorized about how fungus could be used for computing or communication. And I've kind of realized like I'm amongst the mushroom pilled as mushrooms over the past like 5 or 6 years have been like kind of having like a moment, both in like the way psychedelia is like popular again, but just like I see the appeal of like there's like all the mushroom foraging and survivalist stuff around mushrooms, and I'm not really crazy about like kind of the, I don't know, hyper neoliberal mushroom individualism stuff that goes on in like some of the mushroom culture, but I'm interested in like the way like Donna Haraway has written about like or Anna Tsing and sort of the dialogue those two writers have had when writing about mushrooms and like how they have this very interesting history where I think Singh calls it like a contaminated collaborative process where humans and mushrooms have interacted a lot through the years, and sometimes positive and sometimes harmful ways. So yeah, that's like a big, I don't know, I'm rambling, but that's like a big part of writing this book. I was also interested in, I feel like a lot of my comics like have tech criticism as a pretty big part of them. And I wanted to, I get like characterized a bit as a Luddite, which is like a characterization I'm fine with. But because I'm always like very critical of technology, one of the things I'm critical about isn't just like technology in general, but it's about the ways we think about technology as this thing that just invents itself. And like, I think there's this misconception that like these developments just happen and we don't really have much say over them happening. And we hopefully can use it for good rather than ill or regulate it in some way. But we really have no control over these things that just invent themselves. And it has created this sort of like techno pessimism where we just feel like we all acknowledge that whatever potential the internet has is now wasted, and the internet is just like something crappy that we all have to live with. But that's not the case, you know, and the internet was built on an infrastructure of like, you know, it, its roots are in this sort of like libertarian ideology, and it has links to the American military and like this industrial complex. But the internet didn't have to develop that way. There's like all these interesting alternate routes technology could have taken and computing could have taken. And the more you read about it, the more this like alternate history of technology develops, where something like computing or something like the internet or ideas around automation um, aren't like don't aren't built on this terrible infrastructure. And that was like a big part of Birds of Maine, was like imagining what that would look uh, like more egalitarian and like maybe even holistic versions of the internet or of computing. Caitlin asks, I noticed there were lots of panels where you situated the characters in big open spaces. Was this to emphasize living nature of the ecology around the birds? Yeah, I both like kind of drawing open spaces, both because it means I have less backgrounds to draw, but I do like working with like big color fields, and I wanted to like make a very like colorful book. But even just like the logistics of writing about birds meant, and like it is a utopia for birds. It's like ideally it's a utopia for the other kind of non-bird living things in it as well. But a utopia for birds would have a lot of open spaces for them to fly around. And yeah, so like branches and fungus were like the big things I wanted to have like bird architecture be based around, but I did need to make sure that they had a lot of space to fly in. Some of the visuals that like influence the look of it, it's kind of funny because like I have piles and piles of like reference for like flora and fauna in my studio, just like a lot of actual bird books. But for the most part, I like never ever refer to them. Sometimes I do, but I mostly just like soak it in, and then like I think someone who with like more meaningful knowledge of birds might even be actually like frustrated with some elements of the book. So the things that like really did influence the way the look of the like the look of the world was one big one was the art of Joseph Yoakum, and I think it's like pretty obvious to see the way like uh, this sort of drawing like filtered down into my work, not just this comic, but others. I'm like very indebted to his approach to landscapes. And I think I always have been, like even some of my earlier comics. I think it's pretty obvious the way his drawings informed my work. And then another big one was this French Mattioli comic, which I think is a cartoonist most people know for Squeak the Mouse, also because that's one of the only ones that was actually translated into English. I think recently Fantagraphics put out like a nice Squeak the Mouse thing. But M. Le Magicien is like his much more family-friendly comic. And it has these like really beautiful colors. And it's, it's like a fantasy. It's I think like maybe Wizard of Id is like a pretty close analog. I don't even read good French, so I like only have like a vague understanding of everything. But I like love looking at these pages, and yeah, his approach to color and the like otherworldliness of some of his visuals, yeah, has been a big influence on me, and I think really informed like Birds of Maine in particular, like alongside, yeah, a few others. Thank you for the question. And yes, please keep shooting questions as I think of things to talk about from this book. Another influence on it was the Cybersign project from Chile. It was like an aborted project from Allende's government. And it's one I think about a lot. It's become very popular to cover. Like I get the impression, especially within like academia and fine art circles, because it is so like evocative, where it was kind of a proto-internet that was being worked on and developed along like more socialist principles. And after the coup and America's like military intervention, project, of course, was halted. But it had some like initial successes as a form of communication, and it's become like, as people kind of argue about whether or not our current internet can be reformed into something that like we can sort of reclaim or claim some sort of public ownership of it, or reform it in some way that is less nightmarish, or if we like we have to do away with it altogether or something. Like as that conversation happens, it's been something that like people talk about. Yeah, other things about mushrooms. Remember that guy from like Riverdale who buried himself in a mushroom suit? I've been thinking about doing that, but like maybe putting on the mushroom suit while I'm alive, where it like can kind of eat away at me as I go. Mark Bayer was another big influence on the visuals of it, but I'd have to like leave my seat to pick up a Mark Bayer book, as I realized I didn't keep it in my stack of reference beside me. I've worked on daily comics before, and part of the reason like I chose the colors of this too was the last daily I did was this book, Leaving Richards Valley, and it has a lot of overlapping themes, but this one was all black and white and very like densely textured. I used like photo collage as a part of it to get some of the textures, a lot of like photocopy textures. Takes place in Toronto, and it references a lot of like actual Toronto visuals and like signs and stuff. And I really, because that was like a world I was stuck with for so long, it really made me want to like do something that was like quite colorful and didn't have any kind of basis in the world around me. I think, and again, that was like part of a reaction to doing it in 2020, where I wanted to not be the time I was spending drawing and writing, not be too weighed down by the world around me. How far in advance do you write the story when making a daily comic? Thank you for the question. I don't plot out very much. I feel like most of my plotting or most of the planning I do just has to do with figuring out the look of the comic. Because committing to any comic means committing to like drawing in one way or with one in one style or one character design, one syntax, or even like being stuck with like a single cadence can be like a big pain in the ass. So I feel like all of my planning has to do with that right now. I'm in the middle. I like literally just today I started the first page of the next kind of bigger project that I plan to serialize for like a longer portion of time. But I've been mulling it over for a few months now. And yeah, like a lot of it was even just deciding what page size it would be. But in terms of actual plotting, I don't do very much plotting in advance. I like having a premise and maybe like a very rough idea of a character arc I want a few main characters to go on. But aside from that, I tend to improvise things. I found if I plot too much in advance, it feels like a bit of a trap for me, and I get sick of things too soon. So I try to leave things very open-ended as I write, and like let the story tell itself or like reveal itself as I go, which always feels corny to say, like let the story reveal itself. But basically I leave myself open to surprises and surprising myself. And yeah, as a result, my stories tend to be kind of wormy and have like a lot of detours and digressions. And it doesn't suit like there might be times when maybe like I'd need to write something like a lot more focused and I would have to script something. Like I couldn't do like a detective novel or something, you know, something that requires really like focused, heavy plotting. But for my purposes, I don't mind that I have these very like meandering stories, and it sets it up that all of my serialized comics, which at this point are quite a few, I've serialized Brat, Birds of Maine, Leaving Richards Valley, Styx Angelica, ant colony. They all tend to like have these like really big casts of characters by the end of the comic because I like having all these digressions and introducing like new people to the world. Caitlin asks, do you have particular inspirations regarding lettering? Your titles are eye-catching. Thank you. Yeah, one of my lettering is like very, very much informed by gig posters, and I still do a lot of poster work. Finally, like resuming a bit more, I do a lot of like agitprop posters, but only recently there are more gigs happening again, so I can get back to the work of doing gig posters. And that is all has been like a big part of my practice, and the lettering I do there has informed my comics. A lot of design principles I picked up from doing posters inform my comics, because that was kind of how I cut my teeth, like super early on. Before I was even making zines, I was like silk screening gig posters, just like as a high schooler, like in my parents' basement. I had like a little exposure rig that was a pizza box. Yeah, and that stuff taught me a lot. And this is like a thing I cite all the time, like probably in probably too much, but Seripop, Serigraphy Populaire, who printed a lot of noise. They're presently like still doing really incredible like fine artwork, but when I first got to know their work, they were mostly doing design for the noise and punk scene in Montreal and sort of its surroundings. And they had extremely illegible writing, and I love those posters so much. And I remember this thing that they said that they might have been even paraphrasing from someone else about how a poster's job is to not just bring the right people in, but to like keep out squares or like keep out cops. And I always think about that, where like I have been told, and I don't know if it's always a thing my publishers have loved, that my book covers aren't always the most legible. But I always think that like the right type of person will look at it like a somewhat illegible title and be like invited in to decipher it, or they can decipher it because like they're already speaking the language, you know? And if it seems too daunting, it's maybe not a book for them. And I think about like, metal writing is like one of the best examples of that, or like certain types of graffiti. Like there are lots of examples of like subcultures where like if you can't read it, it might not be for you. If you can't read like a metal logo, maybe you don't want to go to the show. Sean, not Sean, asks, before you announce a daily comic, do you already have a bunch of finished days done before you post the first one? Usually for Birds of Maine, I think I had the first week in the bag. And then by the time it kind of was in full gear, I rarely had like too many backlogged. But there would be, there'd be some weeks where I knew I would be too busy with like commercial illustration or, any other sort of like day job stuff. And I would backlog a few, but most of the time I'd only have like 2 days ahead, and I would always tend to work like I'd have tomorrow's covered in case like today something bad happened today, and I'd have the day after covered until I need to like catch up tomorrow. But there are other serials I've done where it really was just like I did it the night before or even the morning of, when I was doing Ant Comic and Styx Angelica, which was both of those were on weekly schedules. Yeah, like a lot of the time I hadn't thought about it at all until it was the end of the week. I think I posted them on weekends at the time, and it was like the end of the week, and then I would think, okay, what do I have to do to get a comic out within 24 hours? And yeah, I benefit from like working on a schedule like that, but it did sometimes feel a little silly because I was like making myself beholden to this fairly rigorous schedule that no one really cared if I like actually delivered on time or not. Tracy says I should do a detective novel. Yeah, maybe. I don't know how. I mean, I tried my hand at one detective story, and it ended up being like pretty popular online, but I actually don't know how many I have in me. I thought I could do a whole book like this where it's like, it was published in last year's Heaven No Hell, also available from Drawn and Quarterly. One of my students is a murderer, but which, where a substitute teacher is trying to solve a murder in this prep school, but then two of the kids end up being the better detectives, and they're both like anti-cop, non-carceral detectives. And I might come back to the idea just because it might be funny to do like a whole book like that. But even that, like where it's not like the reveal was that tightly planned or plotted. It wasn't like a tightly plotted detective comic, but even that was like kind of a pain to write because it's so different from how I normally work, where I actually like wanted it to make a little bit of sense, you know, where normally like I don't need to have a satisfying ending. I think most of my endings are probably like deeply unsatisfying in like a lot of my comics. Like they just end. I think about I'm like a big M. Night Shyamalan fan, and like I think so much about the flack he gets for his endings, and I think everyone is such a baby where it's like endings just 10 minutes. You know, you just saw a whole movie. Who cares about the last 10 minutes? Um, life life doesn't have satisfying endings. Do your relationships have like a nice satisfying ending? Why should the happening? Um, Atomic Trigger asks, is this your main career or do you have another job? Well, I do. I am fortunate enough that I get to draw for a living and have been for a little while. And yeah, my income is mostly split through comics and commercial illustration. And yeah, for about 7 or 8 years, I had a job in animation before I went back to freelancing again. And it was a steady animation job. So yeah, I've been lucky enough that yeah, between comics, which includes like uh, books, and then I've sometimes applied for grants to work on the comics, and then commercial stuff on top of it. It changes every year what the balance is, but it is usually some balance of both of them. Francine assures me that Peggy loves my covers. Thank you. I am aware that it's not always convenient to have illegible covers is all. And I uh, DNQ reminds me about Kid Mafia. Oh yeah, I forgot about Kid Mafia. Someone like tagged me in a Kid Mafia thing. Do I have any in this? I'm sitting next to like a bunch of milk crates that like contain like my life's work in this pile. But I might have thrown away all copies of Kid Mafia, but that was a crime story that I'd been working on for a while. Um, but at some point I got sick of drawing a comic that had like guns and stabbing and stuff in it, and I abandoned it with like a bunch of issues in the bag that nobody ever saw. Patrick just dropped an LOL in the Instagram chat. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate that. Oh no, I've spoken too fast and I've run out of questions. I'm just gonna fill more time. Yeah, wait, I can pull out, I think, some good examples of like old lettering stuff. I have been thinking about how like spines are still the most satisfying thing I do. When I finish books, I like, yeah, extremely common author thing where you like finish a book and by the time you're done, you like can't look at it objectively and you can only think of all like the mistakes and like wasted potential and stuff. But my spines like remain the thing I am most proud of, and it's like the major treat for me. But I think this issue has attempts at old metal lettering, this old short story collection I did. Yeah, I used to spend like a lot of time trying to like imitate old band lettering. And yeah, it taught me a lot. The other thing it taught me, I think about all the time, and I've probably said before too, is like color theory. There's like a thing where now that all of us, myself included, like digitally color things, I do feel like color theory doesn't Wonderful artist Jillian Tamaki uh, was the one who introduced me to the idea of like color story. And I sometimes feel like when you have access to like all the colors, it makes for like less coherent color stories. And I think cutting my teeth silk screening like taught me to do a lot with like a little because I had limited access to colors and like it really was like I had two or three things of ink and I was just forced to make do with like every possible combination of those three colors across like multiple gig posters because I couldn't afford to do any more. Um, and that like the figuring out like what the colors are going to be is like almost the most important part of the comics I do that are in in color. What are your feelings about the astronaut ornithologist? How did you come up with the character? Oh yeah, so in the book, eventually the moon gets visited by this astronaut. Um, and I guess I shouldn't spoil too much about what happens to them, but they don't like an astronaut crash lands. It's an astronaut that's originally supposed to visit. Um, and yeah, the astronaut was there. I wanted to make sure that because it's about birds on the moon living this alternate society on the moon, uh, it certainly like alludes to something bad having happened on Earth, but I didn't want it to make it like a foregone conclusion that Earth is doomed because also like part of, um, I think a big part of my politic is believing that even though things are probably going to be rough for like maybe the rest of my lifetime, that it's not a foregone conclusion that things are so doomed. And I think like part of the big problem, especially like when thinking about like climate, is we're so correctly just weighed down with climate grief and despair, and some amount of despair is appropriate, but people feel really like paralyzed and think like there's actually like no hope for anything. So I wanted to make sure that like Earth is there, um, and it's kind of a question mark because it would be less interesting for me to like talk about all the things that happened on Earth, like oh things got really bad, but then they figured it out. So I just kind of wanted it to be a mystery, and I thought it'd also be funny if it was a mystery to the reader and something that the birds themselves were ambivalent about. So there was open communication between Earth and the moon, and the technology was still being worked on both the Earth and the moon, and art and culture was still developing there, and they exchange art and culture. I point out the ways that bird technology has surpassed the technology on Earth, and then ways where it's like lagging behind. And a big joke in it too is like how Earth is like obsessed with the birds, and the birds are kind of like disinterested in humans. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to like figure out a way to incorporate a human, but then be a bit mysterious about it, which is also why, for reasons explained in the book, the human stays in their helmet the entire time, and eventually their body kind of like melds with the Earth in a different way because the injuries they sustain when crash landing. But yeah, I wanted to like incorporate a human, but be like a little bit cryptic about it and like what their motivations are and um, ways that bird culture might be illegible to them and ways that human culture would be illegible to birds. So um, yeah. Julia asks if I will show more things from my milk crates. Sure. I've been recently told it's like time that I give up milk crates. Like all of my shelving is in milk crates. Um, yeah, here's like stuff that's just immediately around. I have this drawing that I usually like throw out all my drawings, but for some reason this is on top of it. I have like all my really early stuff that's embarrassing. That's like a non-embarrassing early thing I can find. I have this old zine that like Jasjeet Gill, Color Code Press printed. It's called, what is this, Printed Blood? And this has drawings I made in high school. I don't know if this is visible. It's just like all like ramen noodle texture, which was like the sort of thing I used to do like way more of way back. This might be the earliest thing in here. Like anything else is probably like donezo. Um, oh, I have a lot of old stuff in here. Yeah, what's like the least embarrassing thing? Oh, I also have, yeah, like weird old zines like that nobody has. Um, oh yeah, this is wrapped up from a gallery exhibition like 7 years ago, and I've never bothered unwrapping it. But should I do an ASMR stream where I'm like crinkling paper? I used to put out these like pamphlets. This is called an Introduction to Physical Fitness. Um, and it's about a point system that like your whole body's on a point system where every time you wake up from sleeping, you lose 1 health point, and when you run out of health points, you die. Everyone's born with about 100 health points. It's just like a weird pamphlet I made, and I made like maybe 4 of these and would put them around the city in like different laundromats. And I used to do like a lot of fun projects like that back when I was fun. And I have these like #1 comics that I made with Patrick Kyle, who might still be watching on Instagram, and Mickey Zakili, 2 of my dearest friends. And each issue was a new #1 issue where at some point it kind of became a challenge where we'd pick a topic and try to make comics around it. And as the project kept going, we would pick like increasingly asinine topics to make a comic around. So we did like basketball comic, and part of the joke with basketball comic is like none of us knew a thing about basketball. And then this was one of the later ones, like jumping comic, just comics about jumping. But we did like Butler comic was one premise, Pixar's Cars comic, and we did it without ever having seen Pixar's Cars, which I still have never seen. And I also have a lot of like sketchbook stuff. I have a sketchbook zine that like no one has really seen. Maybe I sent some to the D&Q store, but I was gonna take it with me as a tour exclusive for my book Familiar Face, and then that tour got canceled because of like the novel coronavirus. And so I just like stack of these things that like I've not done anything with, and like I'm too lazy to sell online. It has a drawing of me and Patrick playing magic cards. It's pretty good. I'm like I should do something with it because I spent a lot of time making it. Patrick clarifies his LOLs in relation to my being an M. Night fan. I am like a huge, I rewatched like quite a lot of his movies, and then did like a watch through of a few for the first time. And I think he's extremely underrated. And I think I understand a lot of the problems people have with his writing and his filmmaking, but I also think sometimes the way people, some of the criticisms people lob at him, I'm just like, I do not understand and do not respect. um, like people talk about how like literal minded his movies are, and I think like no. This maybe speaks to my own tendencies, but like it's it's like 2022. We still want nuance from our movies. Like grow up. Caitlin asks, was the cover to that high school drawing zines Leonardo printed? I believe this is a silk screened cover, like the whole thing is silk screened, and I would guess this is silk screened onto, yeah, this like hardback format. This has like a lot of, I'm trying to think if the other contributors to this zine would be like fine with me showing off like really, really early work from at this point 15 years ago. Yeah, anyway, like has some like early Jesuit stuff. Pierre Richardson. Oh, yeah, a lot of old stuff. Most of my room is like silk screen zines that were made in this like very, very specific era that many years ago. Genki Comics says, Mr. DeFord, you are a treasure. Thank you very much. Jillian says, show us the oh wait, which comics now? Any advice to aspiring graphic novelists? Um, the big thing I always say to people is to set like show us the pages. The big thing I always say to people is to like set expectations to yourself for yourself and like make those expectations such that they're just like a little above what you think you're capable of. Because I think especially for like a young cartoonist, a lot of what people tend to do is just like go straight for like a really big ambitious graphic novel or like a really big ambitious web comic, and they think like I have this web comic idea or I have this like very long story. I don't know if this crinkling is annoying or like satisfying or like sensual or even erotic, but and they'll it's like a very common thing where they'll bite off more than they can chew and not be able to finish it. Because yeah, it's their first comic. They think they'll get sick of it really quickly or run into problems they hadn't really anticipated. So the best thing I think you can do is to like have a realistic idea of what you already can do. Like you have maybe drawn an 8-page comic or drawn, so printed like X copies of a zine, and to just shoot like a little higher than that at first. Like if you've only done like a bunch of like one-off strips, maybe try doing like a 30-page narrative versus like immediately going for like the 200-page behemoth of a book. Because yeah, that's like a very easy way to like burn yourself out quickly or just end up with like a lot of pages on the cutting room floor. But that's also just like a part of being a cartoonist, is like you don't really learn your limits until you've like come up against them, and like kind of everyone needs to like shit the bed a little. um I've pulled out like other things. Stop sending me messages. This was like another pamphlet I made. um a rare issue of Kid Mafia that got abandoned. um I don't know how many people ever got issue 4. um my friend Dustin Harbin got really mad when he found out one existed. uh Yeah, more like sketchbook zines. I used to be very like rigorous about printing these, like once every year or once every few months, and I'm like no longer so rigorous about doing that. But yeah, and then like really early stuff from uh, here's like a more like a larger version of that page of like metal lettering I did. But this was like an old zine done with Steph Davidson and Jesjeet Gill from like way back. Has these like wonderful Steph Davidson drawings, and then there's one of Jesjeet's pages. Yeah, like great Jesjeet pages. Um, oh yeah, I was talking about posters. Here's like some old posters. Space Face put out this like newsprint collection of gig posters I've drawn. I never got paid for this one. I used to like worship Ian Savonius and all his bands, and he like, I don't know. I've done like multiple things for him that I've never got paid for. So I no longer feel so warmly towards his musical projects. But yeah, I really miss like I'm really glad I can draw posters again. That's like something I missed quite dearly. Um, Back to M. Night. What do you like about his movies? I think like visually he is one of the he does like he's pretty unparalleled just in terms of like visuals, like just pure images. These very like disorienting and bewildering um, scenes, and I just love that. I think about the opening scene of the happening, where like people are kind of falling off of like a construction site, like all the time. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think the happening in particular is like kind of I understand the problems with the writing and acting in that movie. But I think about it all the time as like, it's going to be really hard for anyone to make a piece of art, I think I would say, for the rest of our lifetimes, where climate grief isn't one of the biggest parts of it, even if like a piece of art isn't explicitly about the climate. That's just going to be like part of the texture of everything we do and everything we make for so long. And that is one of the more interesting like early examples of this like very odd, idiosyncratic, goofy blockbuster about climate grief, because the whole premise is that something that we can't get a full grip on has changed in our world that has made people spontaneously want to hurl themselves out of buildings. And at the time, people criticized that for being um, too on the nose. And now I don't know if people would would say that right now. So yeah, I'm a big fan. I think he's like a deeply misunderstood filmmaker. Julia, who has the pamphlet, says she keeps them on the fridge, and the dog one really baffles people. Yeah, I wonder if I have the dog one. Hieronymus also adds that the Pixar's Cars comic is so great. Thank you. Yeah, I maybe one day I'll finally watch Pixar's Cars. What media are you consuming right now? TV or movies? Nothing super interesting. I guess I'm watching the same TV everyone's. I'm watching like Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal, and I have mixed feelings about it, but I'm part of the cultural conversation happening. And then movies wise, I'm in the middle of watching Obayashi's anti-war trilogy, which is great. And I just watched a really interesting one he did called Turning Point, which was about a this is the director of like Hausu and like Drifting Classroom and the Discarnates, who passed away, I guess, at this point 3 years ago now. And he directed three really beautiful, touching um, movies about the legacy that the lasting legacies that wars had on Japan. And they kind of each movie crosses like huge swaths of time, and has a lot of like different visual experiments in it. Casting Blossoms in the Sky is the first of the three. And then it almost becomes a quadrilogy, because the last movie he directed before he died, Labyrinth of Cinema, also like kind of touches on these things. But yeah, he did a movie called Turning Point that I liked a lot. That was really odd, about a woman who joins the editorial staff of a newspaper that's like mostly older men who are quite obnoxious. Yeah, it was a good one. And yeah, I am told to wrap things up, wind things down, as Instagram is going to cut me off in like a minute. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning into this. I hope you like the comic, and like I mentioned, I encourage you to read it online if you want like to sample it, or if you just want to read it and not pay for it. I'll have no way of knowing you did that. So, but if please buy it too, if you'd like. And it's at bookstores everywhere. Oh yeah, I'm being told to hold the book up. I should promote things properly. Yeah, Birds of Maine. It's $40 Canadian, $35 American. Um, this is what the spine looks like. Yeah, thank you. I assume someone else will cut me off. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. Bye everybody.